Hi everyone, it's Shren here speaking. I hope you're well today, guys. Welcome to my room. Today we're going to be talking about the question of meaning for INFJs versus INFPs. Before I move on, let me remind you that I've written a book on the INFJ type, The Ecstatic Soul, the deepest investigation of the INFJ you'll find online. If you have a good understanding of the INFJ but you'd like to deepen that understanding, this is the book to get. All the links are available in the description box below to all the Amazon countries. If you have any questions, you ask me. It's paperback or ebook formats, both options less than $10. Okay, so why did I want to make a video about the question of meaning and then contrast INFPs and INFJs in this regard? Primarily because if you consider the prevalence of Enneagram Type 4 among INFPs, you'll notice that it's almost as prevalent for INFJs. Now, type 4 INFPs or Type 4 INFJs are supposed to share the traits of the 4. And for those of you who are not familiar with the main features of the Type 4, often this Enneatype is called the Bohemian, and it's an individual type. It's a type that is often asking themselves the meaning of their life, the meaning of their contribution to existence, and tends to be absorbed in questions of the nature of their own self, their own psyche. So you have a lot of writers who, unsurprisingly, are Type 4s on the INFP side. You have well-known writers such as Marcel Proust, is perhaps the most famous. On the INFJ side, you also have Type 4 INFJ writers such as Dostoevsky, Hermann Hesse would be well-known examples. On the INFP side, you have William Faulkner as well, although he's a bit of a borderline case, but I will not discuss Faulkner in this video. Now, what's interesting about this situation is that it seems that both INFJs and INFPs can be of such a nature as to be very interested in questions of self, to have always lurking around in the backdrop the threat, the menace, or the risk of getting too self-absorbed and maybe a little bit too much in love with their self-obsessions. Of course, that can produce works of genius, but is it good for mental health? That's a whole other question. But then the question arises, what is the difference between a Type 4 INFJ and a Type 4 INFP? Or just to again, for those who are not familiar with the Enneagram, to phrase the issue a bit more broadly, how do INFPs relate to the quest for meaning, and how do INFJs relate to it? What are the main differences? Since the question of meaning and self is a prevalent one in both cases, we ought to be able to tell them apart. And from having researched this question, from having asked myself the question, I've come to this conclusion. I've come to the conclusion that I think INFPs are tormented by the question of what is the point of living life? What is the meaning that life has for them? What does it offer? And when they fail to find that question, hopefully they don't commit suicide, but they often tend to recreate a world, there's a world of fantasy where they can escape from reality as a coping mechanism for dealing with the hardness of reality. But there is this frustration felt by the Bohemian INFP regarding the lack of match between their existence and what life has to offer. In the case of the INFJ, it's a little bit different. The INFJ is not an FI dominant. The INFJ is a NI dominant, but in this case, particularly for our interest, the INFJ is an FE auxiliary, an FE user, an extroverted feeler as opposed to an introverted feeler. Now, this is the source of a major difference in how the alienation of everyday existence, the supposed or experienced lack of meaning in the world, lack of intrinsic meaning, the duty to create your own meaning, if you like, it's experienced differently in the case of the INFJ. The INFJ doesn't get to a stage where they're almost asking the world, what have you got for me? What is this? Like, what am I supposed to do with this? I'm going to have to create an alternate world. in order to cope with this. It's too hard. And the INFJ might have thoughts of this nature, but because of extroverted feeling and its harmonizing tendencies, the INFJ tends to take for granted that this is the world they've been given. So there's no lamentation on the part of the INFJ that the world is the way it is. There's sorrow, there's rage, social injustice, there's environmental degradation, etc., etc., etc. But there is this sense that this is all we've got to work with. And as a result, the INFJ type 4, bohemian, self-oriented INFJ is more preoccupied with what can they contribute to this world. The INFP is not so much preoccupied by what they can contribute to this world, because they're likely to find this world not satisfying, and therefore to find ways of escaping from this world. As a result of this attempt at escaping, they may in fact produce works that are works of this world, and which are amazing works, and they are enjoyed as works of this world by other people. But the intent from their perspective was to escape from this world. And you can really see books like Proust's In Search of Lost Time as such a book, as such a legacy. The INFJ does not try to escape from this world. The INFJ is asking themselves, how can I actually best match my personality to this world? No escape, but how can I find a space for myself where I can be of most use from my perspective of what meaning can constitute? And there's lots of different ways. Now, again, we're talking about INFJs that are very self-reflective. They're not anything like what you would call a type 2 INFJ, the B4, they have a bit of 9 that makes it even more of a potent mix. They will usually, if they end up writing, they'll produce works a little bit like Dostoevsky's works, where there are serious, abstract and yet applicable moral themes being discussed, or abstract philosophical themes being discussed, a little bit like in Hermann Hesse. The abstract themes are made to be embodied in characters, and the characters are actually living in this world. They're living in this world. It's not supposed to be an alternate world. And the moral themes that are discussed from the INFJ's perspective can be applied. Is there a way of saying you can apply these principles, you can learn something from it to their prospective audience? So there's not as much invention of new worlds, but more like a reconfiguration of particular parameters within this world creatively in order to offer new paths, new possibilities. And you can, I think, also contrast the any approach, which is always envisaging what lies beyond and is external, to NI, which tends to focus in around itself and digs deep where, the digging hadn't been done before. But not in a faraway place, in the same place, but does it differently, gets people thinking, thought-provoking about this world, rather than creating the J.R. Tolkien alternate worlds or the George R.R. Martin alternate worlds or something like that. When you've got an alternate world, it tends to coincide with an INFP output or an ENFP output, maybe. Usually you'll recognize an INFJ alternate world where it looks like this world, except things are a little bit skewed. Things are a little bit different. There is a reconfiguration of parameters that gets you to asking new things about this world that you hadn't asked yourself before. And that's a reflection of the INFP search with self, the attempt to escape from the world, and the INFJ search with self, the attempt to figure out how to best fit with this world that is accepted because of FE as opposed to the INFP's FI. Now, that was my account of the relationship between INFPs and meaning, and the meaning of life, and INFJs and meaning, and the meaning of life. Hopefully also giving you a sort of path, a roadmap to figuring out, if you happen to be a type 4 Enneagram, whether you're more on the INFP side or the INFJ side. If you have any questions, just drop a comment, consider giving me a like and subscribing, and I'll talk to you soon, guys. Bye-bye.